Okay, so before we get started, we figured out how to put on the website the wind and solar forecast and load profile. I think this is pretty interesting. So you can go to spp.org, and then if you scroll down on your phone or whatever, there's a visual that looks kind of like that. You can click on it, and you can see the details. You can kind of drag your finger around. Yep, just like that. So there's a couple of things that's kind of interesting. One, this is actually happening. So that's what's cool. It's not, some fictitious academic study or a static graph on a PowerPoint. This is what's happening. So all the red is actuals. The green is wind forecast. So we actually have a wind forecast that goes out 7 days. I'm thoroughly impressed with the ability to forecast wind even like in an hour. And we're able to do it 7 days out. And we're fairly accurate. Now, there's a caveat. We're less than 10% error day ahead, so 24 hours out. So when we're talking about what's happening tomorrow, which is this massive wind ramp that is going to happen overnight, and then roughly exceed the load, which is the red at the top. We're less than 10% in error now. That's on 32 gigs of installed wind. So, 10% of 32 gigs is what, three gigs? That's roughly 3 Wolf Creeks. So, it's very impressive that we're less than 10% day out, but we still have kind of this margin of, it's a risk profile, right? We have this margin of error that we have to kind of manage. But this is probably going to happen. So we can kind of track that tomorrow. You guys could look at it and pull it up and see. When we talk about this next 20 gigs or 20 to almost, 24 gigs in that tomorrow close to midnight and 1 a.m., again, there's that caveat that we're probably not going to get there, but we're constantly seeing this more and more. And the reason why we're not going to get there is not because of load forecast or wind forecast error. It's because of what we talked about earlier with gas and coal needing to be online. Because guess what happens when everybody wakes up and really eats lunch on, what is that? 2 days out. So what is today? Tuesday. so Thursday at lunchtime, and really morning through lunchtime, there's going to be this wind ramp down. And so we need to make sure that we have enough gas, basically gas and coal, to be able to ramp back up to be able to replace that. So then you can see later on this week, when maybe I guess that's next Monday or next Tuesday, it's going to happen again. And so this is just happening more and more frequent. And what we're trying to do is constantly look at ramp and constantly look at balancing and making sure we have enough resources online. And there is a reliability and economic component to this where we run a reliability unit commitment software. And every time an operator pushes a button for a gas turbine, I mean, you're talking about costs. You're talking about startup, no load, energy admin, costs, and we have to make those resources whole through our wholesale energy market. So it's not trivial to make sure these operators have a really high responsibility, because every time they click the button, it's $50,000. It's not trivial, and they know that. But at the same time, they have the authority to be able to manage this. So we're constantly trying to maximize that win. Anyway, I thought it was neat to show y'all. Let's get straight to the benefits. Okay, so actually right at the start of the pandemic, we updated our mission statement, working together to responsibly and economically keep the lights on today and in the future. I think that's very applicable to what SPP does. We're nonprofit. We do have facilities, a nice facility in Little Rock and an operations center in Little Rock. We also have another operations center that's hot because we run the balancing authority based on the last 10 years or so, really since Nebraska joined in 2009. Our business functions has become more and more critical. So we have a hot that's actually live, not just from a server perspective. So we have another facility that's across the Arkansas River in Little Rock on a different tornado path. So it's a full operations piece, but we don't actually own any other facilities. So from an SPP perspective, when you look at kind of a business plan or do you build widgets or, basically SPP is a servicing type of company. And so independence through diversity, this is already out of date. Of course, I pulled it for June, but just last month, Saskatchewan Power joined as our first international member. So that kind of made some headlines. That's pretty exciting. They are not a full traditional TO, but they are a transmission user, and they are facilitating firm transmission service to be able to, they're having a capacity problem too. We all are. And so they're looking at purchasing more capacity and building more transmission out from North Dakota to Saskatchewan, and we're helping facilitate that. And that's one of their goals and why they joined SPP. But that's pretty exciting. And as you can see, there's a massive amount of diversity. I mean, Google, Walmart, we have just interesting, diverse membership, and it continues to grow and evolve. We've actually got 2 gas pipeline members now, so that's kind of interesting. Let's see. Okay. This is a good footprint to kind of show in one slide what SPP is territory and kind of the expansion efforts on the west. So the red, obviously Nebraska has been a member since 2009. The red is our traditional RTO function, so I'm going to talk a little bit about that today. But just to spend a minute on the West expansion. So we currently have a number of functions. We have the Western Energy Imbalance Service Market. So we're balancing existing. We don't do unit commitment. We don't do balancing authority, but we do manage and redispatch generation that's offered in the Western EIS, which is the blue. And then the yellow orangish color, we're the reliability coordinator for. We also are a program operator for the Western Resource Adequacy Program. We're working with what used to be called Northwest Power Pool. Now they're called Western Power Pool. They are the program administrator. What that really means is we're facilitating a resource adequacy for the Western interconnection. Same challenges. The Western interconnection, they have, Bonneville Power. They have a lot of hydro. They have Arizona is flush with solar. So we're learning a lot about the Western interconnection, but we're trying to fold in best practices, kind of a circular deal where we learn from the east for the amount of wind that we can control. We're learning from the west, and we're trying to develop the resource adequacy to be more reliable in the west. One thing to note is there's 3 interconnects in the nation. So ERCOT, Texas has to be their own kind of thing. You have Eastern interconnection and Western interconnection. That just means that each interconnection targets 60 hertz, but they're AC interconnected. What we've looked at recently is the feasibility of expanding. We operate 7 DC ties along this seam, and we're looking at the potential for expanding the DC ties or jumping the DC ties. And it's not billions of dollars, it's tens of millions of dollars. So in terms of the palatability to actually expand this functionality to be able to manage wind and solar across this size footprint, the Western expansion does, allow for potential net benefit to both the east side and the west side. So we're looking at that. This is a good slide just to show you that we have a 345 backbone, but we also have 230, a lot of 230. Kind of illustrates at least the highway aspect of the electrons on the system. And I already went through that view. Okay, so not going to go through all this strategic plan, but it will be posted. But I did want to highlight a few things, specifically the strategic operations. So we're looking at what we've called HIT and optimization of congestion rights, which does impact the state of Nebraska. Optimized seams, I talked about the JTIQ, but we're also consistently looking at coordinated system plans. I mentioned Saskatchewan, I mentioned the West. So we're kind of looking at how we can build out the system further out. But then you have your Western expansion, innovative transmission planning. I mentioned that is key for folding in GI, folding in AQ, and trying to optimize the system rather than have these individual business functions that try to justify transmission almost like ad hoc, or try to optimize the system in a better way. And then one thing to highlight, I do have some slides later, maybe we can get to them, but it's grid of the future. So what we're really trying to do is make a conscious effort to try to better forecast what's actually happening. So you have the Inflation Reduction Act, you have everything that's in the queue. I mean, everything's obviously been changing over the last, 10 years or so, and we're constantly seeing that. But can we have a better conscious effort on stacking and prioritizing initiatives to be able to get underneath what we actually need to build out from a policy, a process, a tool perspective, working with IEEE, working with NERC, trying to understand exactly what we actually need for the grid to be solid moving forward. So that's a pretty nice effort. Okay, so the benefit of SPP. We have something called the member value statement, and we are requested by the board of directors at SPP to review these things. It's roughly like a trifecta, I would say like a third, a third, and a third, but you can see the numbers. Maybe it's not exactly that, but you have operational reliability, markets, transmission, and then tariff and scheduling and services. So we're a servicing agency at the end of the day, and it's based on economies of scale. So the more mix of load and generation and resources and members that we have, the more diverse that we have, the more benefits that we can provide everyone. And so from a markets and transmission perspective, we actually have a pretty novel way of going about this. And that's, a lot of people cringe at these numbers because you say, oh, well, that's, what is it, precise versus accurate, like the physics thing. And so, you go out to 1.4226 and someone says, well, that's just bogus. You might as well put 50 cents on there. It's, but so these two in particular, what we did is we rerun the market and we pretend like there were individual 16 balancing authorities, and we rebuild the unit commitment and dispatch patterns had basically, NPBD been their own BA, OPBD been their own BA, Lincoln been, and you rerun it. And so, yes, you're still kind of saying a what if scenario back, I guess 13 years ago now, and then you kind of forecast there probably would have been different business decisions and trajectories made by individual units or members going forward. But in terms of just a defendable way of calculating what the benefits are for a market, it's pretty good because it's using the exact transmission facilities that were there, and then we just rerun the market had you not been in a wholesale energy market. And so that's where those numbers come from. Transmission is the exact same thing. So we use the same type of, it's a day-ahead market. So we use the topology, and we look at the transmission that was built through the SPP transmission planning function, and we pull it out, and we say, okay, that transmission facility would not have been built had we not had regional cost allocation, highway-byway cost allocation, economic, and we don't target the reliability facilities. We only target the economic facilities that are associated with, had you not have, joined SPP, then these facilities wouldn't have been built. And we rerun that aspect of it is adjusted production cost modeling. So it ends up being fairly defendable dollars to say for this particular year, this is how much those particular business functions save. So you kind of have to, dig into the details around that. But then when you roll it up and you say, okay, transmission, benefits and savings, markets, and operational reliability. So some of the operational reliability is kind of interesting because, it's, again, a what-if scenario. So had you not joined SPP as an RTO, would you have been in a reserve sharing group? So there's kind of these what-if scenarios, and whether or not NPBD, for instance, would have joined a certain aspect of business functions. So there is you can start poking holes at some of those things. But again, it's hindsight's 2020, and you try to figure out what would have happened had SPP not existed or Nebraska not joined. So that's kind of how we do that and look at it. But you have your FERC's fees and you have your net revenue requirement. A lot of that is salary. We have 640 employees. And again, we do have a building and so forth, but we don't actually have transmission assets. So that does allow us to be a little bit more independent associated with all of the various members that we actually have, because there's not, we don't gain anything by more wind being built or more, gas being built or whatever. And then you have your transmission revenue requirement. So that's the actual transmission build. So this is something that's kind of interesting. We're constantly trying to educate on this. And I spent a lot of time earlier today about rampable capacity and energy adequacy, and that's very important. It's going to remain important for a while. But one aspect that's also important is transmission. And the transmission rates are going up, right? Because as we're building more transmission, then all of a sudden people's bills start, it gets rolled into their rate structure, and you have to pay for transmission. And so when we have more wind and when we have more solar there's no incremental fuel cost, right? But there's a cost to networking all of that together. And then there's a cost to back it up when that zero fuel cost is variable and not there. So that's a constant education for us, because we have to figure out this is a cost, and it's probably going to go up considering where we're going, with the amount of wind and solar that's still in the queue. We're still going to be building out transmission. We're still going to find more benefit and more congestion on the system. And so it's like untapped, locked generation in certain aspects of the footprint, and we need to unlock that for the overall region. And so this is just kind of a constant thing, that it's not a cost SPP is like trying to push on you guys. We're working through the transmission planning process, and we figure out this is a net benefit. And I can say the last couple of years, so I've been responsible for system planning since 2018, and we've built $2 billion worth of transmission in my tenure. Most of my background was operations and markets before that. But since 2018, and the BC ratio has been over 4.0 for all of those portfolios. And that is with very conservative wind. So our wind projections in the ITPs that I'm talking about, we hit our aggressive future 2 year 10, we hit in 2 years time. So we were hitting our aggressive future 2 years into the 10-year projections. And that was with a 4.0 BC ratio. So when we talk about, this transmission, that only goes up and up and up as, more wind and solar gets integrated to the system. So, okay, so SPP, this is a NERC functional model. It's out there on NERC. They update it every once in a while, but we are all of these functions from reliability. We're BA, planning coordinator, market operator, transmission service provider, a reliability coordinator, and interchange authority. I might not focus on all these because I really just don't have time, but just from an SPP major services perspective, again, it's really about networking, but in kind of an umbrella organization to kind of look at more of the region. I always joke with my family whenever they have an outage, they want to say, hey, what's actually going on? I'm like, I'm not worried about your house. I'm worried about losing like all of Lincoln. Like it's orders of magnitude different for SPP. We're not, we don't look at the distribution side, but my family doesn't understand that. Okay. So this is an old map. This was when Nebraska joined. And when I talk about the 16 balancing authorities before I like to show this, even though it's, 13, 14 years old, because this was what it operated before Nebraska joined. And so each one of these types of regions was their own BA. And what that means is, as a balancing authority, they had to bring enough generation to be able to serve their load, and they had to do it every single day, every single operating hour. When we implemented the integrated marketplace and we did a centralized unit commitment across the entire region, and this was before IS joined, so it was before the Dakotas joined, we immediately saw 5 gigawatts just off. So when we talk about these market, let's see, it's not working. Okay, when we talk about these market savings, majority of that is unit commitment costs. So really, it's a economies of scale thing. It's circling more BAs from a regional perspective and being able to operate more consistently, and basically just lopping off 5 gigawatts of generation that you just didn't have to have online had you, been a single BA. And that's exactly what that graph shows. This one right here. So all of these territories just went away, basically, from a BA perspective. Okay. Market savings. So on average, we're looking at 744 million. When you look at the production costs, so totaling up the production costs of 800 plus power plants, and I know that this one shows, 5,100, but that includes distributed demand response. It's roughly 800 when you talk about something like 10 megawatts or more. So it's still a lot of power plants. You say that's a lot of money, but our production cost is like $9 billion a year. So it doesn't take all that much fraction to reduce unit commitment across the region annually, and we save that kind of money. So it becomes just almost a no-brainer at that point, because the investment that it takes to actually have the staff, and that's staff on the utilities as well, to be able to manage congestion, with their congestion rights market and offer in day-ahead market and do all their settlements and shadow settlements, everything that, there is work to be done to facilitate a wholesale energy market. But it's a drop in the bucket for even the fraction of production costs that we save on average per year. So that's where we get that number. And then, as you can see, it kind of illustrates, this is based on the annual FERC State of the Markets report. And so for 2021, we were the cheapest in the region. A lot of that is attributed to the combination of transmission and wind and the overall optimization that the market brings. So it's kind of all three coming together. Okay, so Ben Franklin said, if you fail to plan, you're planning to fail. Again, my background is operations and markets, so I always thought, real time's the only time. And we always used to make fun of the planners, but now I am one. It's true. I mean, we have to plan, and you can't build a transmission facility overnight. You can't build generation overnight. So I mentioned this earlier on, the slides for transmission planning, but I think I do have this thing. Okay, this gives an update on what our experience for the transmission planning study, and if it does go through FERC Order 1000, transmission owner selection, and then the design and right-of-way acquisition construction. So it takes 3.5 to 8.5 years. It just takes some time. And so forecasting is massive, and it's always been important, but gone are the days that OPPD, says we're going to grow 1.2% load and just call it a day, and we just run the models and we just build that out. It's far more complicated than that. At the break, I had a conversation with an individual about EV. And so, if you talk about EV load and even just a fraction of what's being projected to be, bought and charged, that you're talking about gigawatts of load at night that we have to account for. And whether or not there's this, kind of notion of, and if the software's there, that's fine. I mean, I own an EV, but I definitely, when I wake up, I want it to be charged. And I can say probably with confidence that most people in SPP's territory that are going to buy an EV are going to feel the same way. And so that means that we need to be realistic in the load profiles, that if, 1 million people have, 240 volt, 24 amp or 30 amp cars, they're charging at 2 in the morning to 4 in the morning or 6 in the morning so that they can better have a charge when they wake up, then we need to prepare for it. It's not just the distribution side, it's also the generation side. We need to make sure that we're building enough capacity and uncertainty in what we're actually operating towards and projecting those things. So that's just one aspect of it. I mean, you talk about crypto load, you talk about just the load profile shapes that are changing, the electrification of things. I mean, it's just a massive thing, and that's just on the load side of the power balance equation, not to mention all the generation stuff we talked about earlier. How much time? 4 minutes? Okay. So I talked about that earlier. One thing before I open up the questions, transmission from a value perspective. So this is kind of like a decision. If you ever take a business course or something, this is something you probably encountered, or maybe you do in your daily job, but you run through a tornado chart or you run through a risk matrix and you try to come up with decision quality. How do you actually make a quality decision, especially for things in the future that we're all wrong about, where you try to quantify those things and you try to figure out what is the best trajectory of a decision that has the least amount of regrets. And that's what we try to do with these transmission plans as well. So we do additional sensitivities. This just gives you an example of when the cost is over here and you look at this gap and you say, okay, what happens if the gas price goes low to like $2? Or what happens if the wind doesn't come in as fast as we think it does? And you try to actually come up with a tornado chart. We use this as a tool so that we can be confident in not just the models that we actually run, but kind of the range of outcomes and forecasts that we see, so that when we build these long transmission lines that take years to build, we can be confident all along the way that it's actually the right thing to do. I think I went through that. So I guess to conclude, I'll just conclude with the value of SPP being members and really networking. Our organizational structure and stakeholder process is extremely unique. That's part of the reason why we're expanding to the West. A lot of West parties see that as a great benefit. Versus California ISO's governance model. And so they see SPP's model as being very well done. I really appreciate it as well. It makes me kind of happy to work for SPP because I work for smart individuals that are our members, and we're kind of all, developers might have their own goals, or gas pipeline guys might have their own goals, or NPPD might have their own goals, but we're all trying to figure out, what does this grid look like? And that's what SPP really values. And it's going to get more complicated before it gets simpler. I think, the next few years are going to be quite interesting as we get more solar on and we see the load profiles change. Anyway, no, we only have a couple of questions left, but see, I told you I'd run out of time on one of these. Y'all have any questions?
You talked a little bit about the load. I think you said 53 gigawatts in SPP, right? 53?
Yes.
Yeah, and so also with the volatility across the United States and data center growth and good living in the Midwest, do you project that there's going to be a lot of load growth, or folks moving here? And you might have put that in, I'm sorry, one of your charts.
Sorry.
If you could just speak to that, that'd be helpful.
Yeah. So we do project load growth, but more than that, we actually project more energy use. So like the shoulder months and so forth, they're going to start flattening out, which is actually really helpful because then you're not dealing with so much of a vast change between summer and winter. Something that MISO just recently went to is a seasonal PRM. So they have a planning reserve margin for spring, summer, winter, and fall. We're moving towards from just a summer to summer and winter, and then we'll kind of reevaluate the fall as well. But that's primarily why, because you want to look at the load shapes that are filling in those shoulder months. Thank you.